This is lesson 1.7 on rational power equations. Just as a reminder, remember when we say the word rational, we basically mean a fraction. So 2/3, -5/7, these are all fractions. Whenever we raise a number to a rational power, each of those numbers means something pretty specific. The numerator means something, the denominator means something else, and whether or not it's positive or negative means something else as well. What the suggestion that I make is to look at it in the order of numerator, denominator, and then whether or not it's positive or negative. Now that's just the suggestion, that's not the rule. There are exceptions to where a different order is more reasonable, but that's usually the one that I would try first. The number that we see in the denominator, that's going to tell us to take that corresponding root. The number in the exponent, we're then going to take the number we just found, raise that to that corresponding exponent, and then finally, if our number is positive, we're going to take the reciprocal of that number. So for example, if we raised a number to the -2/3 power, that would mean we need to take the cube root of the original number, square that new number, and then take the reciprocal. Now, when we're working with rational power equations, so we actually have variable terms that are going to be raised to these rational powers, what we always need to do is to isolate the terms that are raised to these rational powers. Now, the problems that we see in our drills for this section, that's going to be done for us already. The term raised to a rational power is already all by itself, so we won't need to worry about that. But in general, outside of the drill problems, if you have something with a rational power and you're wanting to solve for a variable within it, you're going to need to get that by itself on one side of the equation. Once you get that isolated, you're going to need to raise both sides of the equation to the reciprocal power. So just flip it. Do not change the sign. So for example, if we were raising it to the 2/3 power, we would want to raise both sides to the 3/2 power. If we were raising it to the -3/4 power, we'd want to raise both sides to the -4/3 power. Again, keep the sign the same. Do not change the sign, but we are going to raise it to the reciprocal power. Be aware that when we're doing this, so for example, if in doing one of these problems I needed to raise both sides to the 3/4 power, that 4 is telling me that I'm taking the 4th root of both sides. Remember, whenever we take the even root of both sides of an equation, we need to take plus or minus those roots. Same story applies here. If you're taking an even root, you need to remember to put in that plus or minus. Alright, so let's look at this quick example of just raising a number to a rational power. So 27 to the -4/3 power. Now if you take the suggestion that I made of considering the denominator, then the numerator, then the sign, you can think about the problem like this. It's like we're raising 27 to the 1/3 power, then we're raising it to the 4th power, then we're going to raise that to the -1st power. So 27 to the 1/3 power, that's the same as the cube root of 27. Again, the number in the denominator, we're going to take that corresponding root. So we need to figure out what the cube root of 27 is. Well, if we think through it, I hope we can realize that 3 times 3 is 9 times 3 is 27. So the cube root of 27 is just going to be 3. So we now have 3 to the 4th power. We want to raise that to the -1st power. 3 to the 4th power, 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. 27 times 3 is 81. So 81 raised to the -1st power. That tells us to take the reciprocal. So that will be 1 over 81. Alright, so let's consider this example. So we want to solve x plus 9 to the -2/3 power equals 16. So notice here that our term raised to a rational power is already isolated. So what we need to do is we need to raise both sides of the equation to the reciprocal power. So again, we just flip the fraction. We leave the sign exactly the same. So the reciprocal of -2/3 That's going to be negative 3 halves. We're going to raise both sides to the negative 3 halves power. The reason we raise it to the reciprocal power, remember that when we have some term raised to an exponent, and then that whole term is then again raised to another exponent, we can simplify that by multiplying the exponents together. So in this case, negative 2/3 times negative 3 halves, that's going to be just 1. So our left-hand side, the part that was causing us trouble, is now just x plus 9. On the right-hand side, negative 3 halves, this 2 is telling us that we are raising this, that we are taking the square root of this number. Remember, when we take the square root of both sides of an equation, do not forget to put in that plus or minus. So we need that plus or minus here. Okay, so 16 to the negative 3 halves power. So again, this tells us to take the square root. This tells us to raise that number to the third power. And this tells us that we're going to take the reciprocal of that final term. So negative 3 halves. So 16, the square root of 16, that's 4. 4 cubed, that's going to be 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 4 is 64. And then this negative tells us to take the reciprocal. So here we have plus or minus 1 over 64. So we have that x is going to be negative 9 plus or minus 1 over 64. Now, if we encounter this type of thing on a drill quiz, I am almost certainly going to be lenient in this case. We could say that this is our final answer, and it's not my favorite form, but I would accept it considering the time constraint that we're under. Since we have plenty of time right now, let's go ahead and go through the process of getting this into really perfect final form. So this negative 9, we need to get a common denominator. Right now it has a denominator of 1. We want a denominator of 64, so we're going to multiply top and bottom by 64. So that's going to give us, well, 64 on the bottom. 9 times 64, let's see here, 9 times 4, that's 36. Carry the 3. 9 times 6, that's 54. Plus 3, that will be 57. So you have negative 576 over 64. Don't freak out. That is a nasty number. It's okay. So we have x equals negative 576 over 64 plus or minus 1 over 64. So then our two options, we're going to add 1 over 64, we're going to subtract 1 over 64. Since this is negative, when we add, that will give us negative 575 over 64. When we subtract negative 576 minus 1, that will give us negative 577 over 64. So there are our two final answers.